Chapter 9. Followed. Hiccup preferred to stay above the clouds when flying by night, especially on nights when those clouds collected to form a solid blanket to cover the world. Above the clouds, Hiccup could see fairly well, for even dark clouds would reflect and enhance the light of the moon and the stars, so that even his pitiful human eyes could appreciate his surroundings. But below a starless overcast, with nothing but black waters and sightless sky surrounding him, Hiccup was left visually numbed. He felt like he was moving through a cold black vortex. It made flying unenjoyable. And yet, here they were, the moon just passing the apex of its rise as they skimmed the crested peaks of the Channel's whitecaps, leaving Hiccup chilled and wind-whipped, as well as blind. All because of Toothless. "I can catch this one without you even noticing." It didn't take long into the friendship for Hiccup to realize Toothless had a bit of an arrogant, competitive streak, as well as a penchant for showing off.
"I got news for you, I've already noticed,"
Hiccup said dryly. He was anything but amused with his best friend. His soaked and freezing feet were a testament to that. Toothless thought he could do a quick skim and snatch without getting Hiccup wet. He couldn't. Yet. "This time he won't," Toothless assured him. He didn't seem to have a problem sensing fish traveling too close to the surface.
"If I lose my feet, I won't be able to help you fly, and then we'll both be grounded and miserable."
"You're so dramatic." Hiccup sighed loudly, hoping to at least make his displeasure known. He'd make it to land before his feet froze off. Both he and Toothless knew that much, and his new boots had been doing a fairly good job of protecting them. And Toothless did require more food than him, if barely, so a little midnight snack was understandable. But he wanted to see. He was a human. Relying on his hearing would only bring him so much comfort, his sense of smell even less so. At best, Hiccup could guess how close he was to the water by the sound of small waves slapping against each other. All he could smell was salt and thick air waiting to be showered through. Toothless released a short, panicked wail and jerked up. His body arched back so suddenly that his rider found himself vertical.
"Whoa!"
Hiccup's reflexes engaged. He slammed his foot into position, too, to counter the movement. He couldn't see. He had no warning. He could only trust. For the first time in months, the dragon-human duo's movements were out of sync. Hiccup's action unintentionally put Toothless with his back to the water, belly up, making the boy cling harder to the dragon. Toothless still moved under the effects of panic, now augmented in that split second by complete vulnerability, and quickly twisted in mid-air to right himself with beating wings that desperately aimed to get the pair away from the water. The abrupt maneuver yanked at Hiccup's leg, and he let out a pained wail. His fingers gripped wet leather as gravity tried to dislodge him.
Okay,
he growled, trying to figure out Toothless' intentions. He shifted the tail fin to position 4 and led Toothless to the rest. They accelerated higher and higher at a faster and more desperate pace than Hiccup had ever experienced before. Hiccup knew they passed through the clouds when the air got cold and clammy and dense, and then light. Wan and gray, but still there and still showing that Hiccup did, indeed, have 2 hands in front of him. He would have been more interested in his improved vision had he not just experienced a mini panic attack.
"What was that?"
Hiccup gasped. His heart pounded high in his chest, and the new altitude reminded him of how cold salt water could be at night. He hadn't forgotten his pirating the pirates escapade. "There's something down there. It's big." Toothless sounded apologetic. "Are you okay?" Hiccup could practically feel the anxiety rolling off the night fury. He had to wonder how close they were to danger without him even realizing until Toothless acted. And if he had fallen, they both would have been in trouble. His hands moved to the chilled scales on Toothless's neck, wanting to give himself any extra sensory intake. His leg hurt. He probably pulled something, and now more than just the air shook his arms.
"I'm fine. Let's get to Flanders,"
was all that Hiccup said. If something could scare Toothless, then he had no desire to meet it himself. "Astrid, dear, would you come here for a moment?" Glum Hofferson called to her daughter as she expertly tucked a needle through the margin of a linen dress. That girl looked up from the sprang she had been attempting to master. Her mother had been forcing her to practice, claiming Astrid at least needed the domestic know-how of a proper Viking. Though resentful of the distraction, Astrid tackled the task much in the same way she tackled everything else, with precision, determination, and perfection. Unfortunately, the parent she had been trying to keep steady refused to bend to her will, and she made a silent declaration that the loom would become her greatest adversary, second only to dragons. She put the bone stick and threads down, none too gently, giving her work a withering glare for its disobedience before standing. "Yes?" she asked with forced politeness. Her patience had been thin all day, and the stifling home didn't help. Astrid had always been closer to her father, who, at the present time, was away on an exploring expedition and wouldn't be back for a fortnight. He was the one she could bond with over weapons and joke with as they sparred. Without his large but calming presence in their household, things between she and her mother were becoming more and more strained. "You know Gnorrech, right?" Glum asked. The woman continued with her work, able to wield a needle and hold a conversation like a master. And though she had no intention of ever spending so much time on her rear, Astrid couldn't keep the envy from her breast. She had never been a multitasker. She was too focused. "Yeah?" the girl prompted, suspicious. On the Isle of Berk, everybody knew everybody, and Norwich was no exception. The man aged around in his early 30s, a fair dragon killer, but a better boat crafter, and recently widowed last winter when his young wife fell to illness in the last months of her first pregnancy. "Well, he's come to us with a proposal." A subliminal dread had loomed over the conversation from its start, but it wasn't until now that it registered to Astrid why. "Mother, no! And a rather generous bride price. His family's in good standing. I'm a warrior," Astrid argued, trying to push down the panic threatening to overrule her emotions. She had to stay in control, but she'd do anything to avoid this. Anything. "I'm the best." Glum sighed. "You are, dear, but you can't just marry me off. Not now. This village needs me, probably more than it needs half of the warriors here. And I need you taken care of," Glum said over her daughter's objections. "You're 16, plenty old to be married, and—" She paused, only for a second. "And there is the financial aspect of this to consider, which is why we have not agreed to anything yet." Glum hesitated again, carefully choosing her next words. "You are the best, love, and your father and I are so proud of you, which is why we're expecting more offers from this winter and the next. Wretch is a smart match, but they could be much better if we're smart about this." Astrid had to consciously keep her mouth from dropping open. "What am I? Some yak to auction off?" she shrieked in derision. Her face felt hot. Astrid wanted to curse her mother for bringing this to her, curse Norwich for instigating it, curse her father for not being here to stand up for her. She wanted to curse herself for not seeing this coming after weeks of annoying, subtle hints. But most of all, she wanted to curse the gods for making her a woman. Why couldn't she have been born a boy, or a bog, or off of Berk? Even during times of war, when the roles were more equal, it was never the same. She was being held back. Status, children, survival. Those were the Viking priorities. Or rather, survival, children, then status, as Berk would have it. Everything tied into the war. Men were allowed to make fighting their number one priority. Many would get married for propriety and to continue their bloodline and to avoid stigma. It was a simple, straightforward life that Astrid would be able to have complete control over, one that she could advance in. But when a woman married, she was suddenly running a household and expected to put her family first to ensure their safety before running out for the kill. Women never got the first kill when they ran a home. And the pregnancies. Oh, gods. She didn't want... "Do not take that tone with me," Glum snapped. "This is our way, you know that. This shouldn't come as a surprise to you. Would you rather be married to a southerner, be no more than a piece of property? You're 16 for Odin's sake. The Almighty, we've been far too lenient with your generation. We could have been accepting bride negotiation years ago for you, but no. Your father decided to indulge your need to become an exceptional warrior." Glum thought of the Thorsten girl that Astrid used to hang out with. The poor thing was nearly 17 and didn't look to have any marriage on the horizon. Of course, that could have more to do with how she terrified all the men. "You can still fight and be married," she added. Her voice was softer, placating even, but the gaze she held over her daughter told Astrid nothing was for debate. Marriage would be her new goal. Astrid held her mother's stare, looking murderous. A pause reigned, then Astrid lowered her eyes to the floor. "And Dad agreed?" She focused on the familiar cracks and crevices in the wood, lines she had long memorized. She suddenly felt suffocated. Like the life she had been trying to outrun had finally caught up with her, and with it came the shackles of social niceties that would tie her down for the rest of her life. She missed Gloom's slow, tentative nod. Perhaps she meant to. "Aye, he did." Astrid gave no visible reaction to the muted stab of betrayal. It was silly to be upset at her father. Her mother was right about one thing. This was going to happen some way or another. Of course, her father would want to see her off to a suitable future. It's what fathers did. Of course, he would want to hand her over to another man, another family. Want to give up their late-night talks and early morning spars? A blast rocked the house. The pasture fence, just outside the ground floor window, exploded into flames. Dirt sprinkled down from the loft above, powdering the unfinished dress and shading 2 heads of blonde hair. Neither woman paid any heed. The shouts of Vikings and the bleating of terrified sheep hadn't the chance to penetrate the house's walls before Astrid had an axe in her hand. "Astrid," Gloom said threateningly. "Astrid, we are not done with this conversation." Astrid's strides had already taken her to the door. The words stopped at the frame. Her lip curled. Trust her mother to prioritize social standing over an occurring dragon raid. She whirred on the spot and thrust her blade in the direction of the woman, making her second silent vow of the night to never, ever become like her. "I'm going to prove my worth right now," Astrid swore loud. "I'll be better off wielding a weapon than... I'd rather die by a dragon than get married." The last part was bit out rather dramatically. She swung the door open, wider than necessary, and slammed it hard behind her in another theatrical display. Her cheek would cost her. Of this Astrid had no doubts. If she did survive, and she really had no intention of doing anything else, she'd be due for a sore ear and a tongue lashing before she would be allowed to bunker down in bed. But it would be worth it. She leapt over a pile of flaming wood and smashed an adder on the head with the flat side of her axe. The dragon staggered back and abandoned the sheep it had been trying to fly off with. The handle of Astrid's axe hummed with the reverberation of the blow. Her arms warmed. This was what she was meant to feel. The power of her own strength and competence, not the arms of some man who knew how to bargain. Fueled by more anger than she knew how to handle, Astrid bellowed a war cry and charged at the dragon to finish the job. It limped back, eyes unfocused as its large head shook the disorientation. It wouldn't escape her, she would be sure of it. She brought her axe down with another shout, wanting to feel that power again, wanting to feel its blood and its pain and to know she had caused it. For tonight she wanted to feel like a warrior and nothing but. She wanted to relieve the tight, crushing knot in her chest. It would be worth it, just for tonight.
"I'm going to explore the town for a bit,"
Hiccup announced as he stretched his arms back beneath the noon sun. He felt rested enough, having slept since they arrived, long before the sun did, and comfortable in his new, roomy clothes. "You always want to explore towns," Toothless said with his usual afternoon lethargy. He was kind enough to open his eyes when he addressed Hiccup, but made no motion to leave his sleeping position.
"It's cool. The architecture is always changing, and they'll probably have all sorts of different types of food."
"Can you speak the French words?" Toothless asked. Hiccup frowned for a moment and then shrugged.
"Better than English. Either way, we're still close to Wessex. There have to be plenty of people along the coast who speak lots of languages. It's prime trading territory."
"And when we move to lands where you cannot speak?"
"I'll have you beat people into submission for me."
Hiccup smiled brightly.
"No talking necessary."
"Sure, that'll convince them not to kill me on sight." Toothless moved his tail so that his good fin covered his eyes. He, at least, was not done resting. "Be safe, come back, no fighting, yada yada yada." Hiccup had to smile at the very human phrase. He forwent a parting salute, knowing it would be lost on Toothless, and marched on towards the shore. From what he remembered last night, if he followed the waterline east, he should eventually hit a settlement. He recalled this quite well because his eyes, once deprived of light, seemed drawn to any source afterward. This included candlelit windows rosts away. The sun warmed his back whenever it managed to break through the clouds, and the sound of the gently moving surf created a relaxing atmosphere for a mid-morning walk. He continued on with a slight limp, recognizing a pulled muscle in his calf. It would be fine in a few days, certainly nothing a little walk would aggravate. Water hit the side of his face. Again. And while it looked like it could rain any second, Hiccup knew this came from the strait.
"What is up with this channel?"
Hiccup muttered. It didn't seem to matter which coast he was on, something in there didn't like him. And last night proved it even unsettled Toothless. Somehow, Hiccup knew whatever he sensed at the docks yesterday, and whatever scared Toothless the night before, was the same thing. Maybe it followed them? Despite that thought in mind, Hiccup's legs began to bring him closer to the lapping water. Curiosity would be his downfall, but he really just needed to know. He was close enough to the tree line. If worst came to worst, he could always sprint back to Toothless. A pulled muscle wouldn't hinder him enough to get caught. Hiccup continued to approach, continued to make excuses in his head, mindful of the slippery rocks and strong gusts of wind that picked up the closer he got to the shore. He kept his eyes trained on the water, trying to grasp a sense of oddity or find anything out of place. He felt like a first-class idiot when he couldn't.
"Come on out,"
Hiccup invited mockingly, knowing he had worked himself up over nothing.
Man, what a waste of...
The water exploded. A long and gargantuan creature burst from the depth nearly 50 fathom out to sea, so sudden and powerful the resulting spray left Hiccup drenched. The white-blue, serpentine body extended far above the sea, seeming to be all thick neck and blending with the monochromatic setting. The face was out of place for a giant snake. It had a long but rounded snout, decorated with 2 blowholes and webbed fangs along its jawline. Rows of spines protruded up 2 sides of its back, topped with a pair of long and curved horns at the crest of its head. Hiccup didn't know how much more there was to the monster below water, if it had fins or feet, but he couldn't be bothered to drag his eyes away from its head. Hiccup stood, frozen, soaked, and rooted, and knew its sudden appearance wasn't a coincidence. A giant lip curled over a long tusk as it surveyed him with filmy, clouded eyes. Hiccup would have thought it blind were it not for the sharp focus it had trained on him. This was it. This was the thing that he had sensed earlier. This presence, this power. Something about this beast spoke of ancientness. Hiccup's heart must have lodged in his throat. He couldn't scream or breathe or talk. He couldn't move. He wanted to run, sort of. He knew he was supposed to move, that this was the part where he ran screaming to Toothless, but he couldn't bring himself to turn away. His knees felt locked, and he had no desire to place his back to the sheer magnitude that was this being. This was a sea serpent. This was something they had not yet encountered in Berg, but would grow on tales of their elusive behavior and their stealthy, underwater method of attack. This was a myth that just decided to pop up to directly address him. It glided forward with a grace unknown to man and a fluidity born only from the sea. Hiccup couldn't appreciate it, too frozen. The beast lowered its head in a movement so fast for its size that it spurred Hiccup to scramble back.
"Oh, shit!"
He threw his hands up, whether for protection or to calm the serpent he didn't know, and closed his eyes. He recalled that time he tried the dragon mint on the grunkle, which ended well, or that time with the wyverns, which didn't. But Toothless said wyverns were like dragon rats. This was bigger, and probably just as intelligent as Toothless. And probably wasn't going to eat him in one gulp, because he was still alive. Hiccup peeked one eye open and was greeted with the sight of a giant, flared nostril. Hot air washed over the human, and the distinct scent of fish permeated from the dripping scales. Hiccup straightened, slow and hesitant. He was face to face with a head that was easily 5 times the height of him. It stared at him, but made no move to kill him. This was good.
"Hey."
His voice cracked and Hiccup cleared his throat, trying to be rid of the nervousness.
I...
He took a breath, willing the same calm over his heart that he used with all dragons. The wyverns were a failed experiment, but this creature had yet to attack. In fact, it stilled further when he addressed it.
I'm Hiccup."
Introductions were a good start.
"You, followed us, didn't you?"
He didn't have any dragon mint with him. Would that even work on a sea monster? Were they a type of dragon? Was there a dragon seaweed of sorts that would have the same effect? Hiccup didn't want to get close enough to see if the pressure point worked. Though in that area he may not have much of a choice. The giant had resumed encroaching on his personal space. Its nostrils flared over and over again, clearly trying to place a scent on him.
Uh-oh. Wait!
Hiccup stumbled backwards, heels catching on rocks. He hadn't fallen yet, a miracle in its own right, but he was beginning to lose his head as the sea dragon's intentions became harder and harder to read. First it was going to eat him, and then it wasn't, and now? Now its lips were curling back again, showing off 2 long fangs as well as a mouth full of serrated teeth. Its pupils constricted into slits, and a growl rumbled from its body. Whatever scent it caught on him, it didn't like. Hiccup forcibly swallowed with a dry throat, unable to tear his eyes away from the stained ivory, even as brackish, putrid breath bombarded him.
Oh, frig!
He held his hands out again, fingers shaking slightly. He could salvage this, maybe. It was certainly too late to run. A heavy force knocked him from the side and sent the sea serpent reeling back with a loud hiss. Hiccup landed on the rocks, scraping his palms on grainy shards.
Hiccup, get back to camp!
Hiccup shook his head and coughed. He looked back. The black dragon stared down the sea monster, teeth extracted and tail swishing. Of everything to notice in that moment, Hiccup noticed how tiny Toothless looked.
Toothless? What?
Where had he come from? How long had he been here? It was just like in the forest, Toothless standing between him and danger, only a different setting and a different opponent. Hiccup shakily pulled himself to his feet. He no longer felt in immediate danger now that the monster had retreated back some. Not that they were safe. Hiccup knew how fast it could move when it wanted to strike.
It's none of your concern.
What? Hiccup was thoroughly confused. He had yet to do as Toothless commanded, opting to stay just shy of Toothless's rump.
He wouldn't have hurt you. He's not dangerous.
Hiccup felt he had to disagree with the last point. Its fangs were longer than his body. Oh, you noticed that, did you? For one moment longer, Hiccup thought Toothless was borderline reading his mind, when he suddenly understood. Toothless wasn't talking to him. He was talking to the sea serpent.
Well, of course he does. He's my human.
There was a pause, and then, clearly. Toothless's tone had gradually gone from panic to annoyed, and was now verging on sarcastic. Hiccup desperately wished he could understand the sea monster's part of the conversation. Whatever it said aggravated Toothless, and yet its body language did not come off as hostile.
Absolutely not. Get back to the water. We'll be out of here soon enough.
Hiccup frowned. Maybe he should make one of those bond thingies with the sea serpent, not that he knew how. Then they could all have a nice, 3-way conversation, and he would be able to put in his own 2 cents. Toothless clearly wasn't the diplomatic sort. Toothless spun around and head-butted Hiccup none too gently in the side, hurting him back towards their camp. Hiccup was startled to find the sea monster had actually done as Toothless said, and retreated back down into the water.
What?
He glanced behind him, almost missing the grey crown of the monster amidst the rocky waters. Only the eyes were held above, watching him, in a terrifying intensity.
Move,
Toothless growled. Hiccup got the distinct impression that Toothless's anger spread to more than just the sea serpent. And he was right. As soon as they were under the cover of the trees, Toothless rounded on him, still with the same tensed, arched posture he had displayed with the monster.
What were you thinking?
The ferocity took Hiccup aback.
I just wanted to see. See what? If he was hungry? It turned out fine in the end,
Hiccup pointed out, annoyed.
I don't think he intended to eat me.
Let me guess, you tried to pet it again?
I did not. Well, you certainly didn't run away. You don't...
I do know that. I know you stayed. I know you tried to make friends, like you always do.
He could have killed you,
Toothless continued, not wanting to hear any of Hiccup's excuses.
Do you even know what that was? What he was capable of?
Hiccup had a pretty good idea on both accounts, and yet he hesitated. If anything, it seemed curious.
But he didn't...
Hiccup began, only to be cut off again by the pacing dragon.
I wasn't close enough. This is just like last time. You don't think, do you?
A flock of birds took flight from the treetop above, and Hiccup took an involuntary step back. He felt like he was talking to Stoic all over again. Indignation welled, and with a flushed face he snapped,
You don't always have to protect me. I'm not completely helpless.
I do always have to protect you, Toothless roared. The area was silent for a moment as the 2 males stared at each other. Toothless was panting, teeth still bared, and to anyone else he would have looked terrifying, but Hiccup could only feel resentment. Hiccup nodded.
Right.
He turned from Toothless and began to walk in the direction of their camp.
Right,
he repeated under his breath. Where are you going?
To town, Hiccup said shortly. Where you can rest assured I won't be eaten by a sea monster.
Toothless snarled. I have to worry about more than sea monsters. You seem to have a talent for trying to get yourself killed. Do you enjoy driving people crazy?
Well, since it's the only thing I seem to be good at, then yeah.
He came upon the small clearing they had bunkered down in for the morning and started towards its effects. Oh, no, you don't. Before Hiccup could reach his back, he felt the weight of Toothless on him again, this time landing on his shoulders and pinning his body to the ground in a hard tackle.
Ugh,
Hiccup grunted.
What the hell are you doing?
Keeping you in my sight until you are ready to move away from the coast. Why don't you sleep until your clothes dry?
I just slept.
Hiccup snapped, his struggles futile against Toothless's superior strength. His frustration only continued to mount.
Why are you so damn threatened by that thing? It didn't even hurt me. It didn't try. I don't think it was even going to.
You don't know that.
Neither do you.
A moment of silence passed. Hiccup realized Toothless wasn't going to say anything.
Toothless? Toothless, get off me. At least let me change my clothes.
Again, the dragon didn't respond. Hiccup knew he wasn't dead. He could feel his chest move with each breath.
This is so immature. Damn it, Toothless.